I want to thank everyone for coming today. We have a nice talk about keeping a healthy 501(c)(3), which is important, which always has been important, but now it's really important. So, and Reverend Joan Ross from WNUC in Detroit. She is the station manager. She's also the board chair for the Association of Affiliates. She's going to lead the discussion today with the director and legal, oh, I almost said it without my notes, executive and legal director of the Sugar Law Center, John C. Philo. And they have been a dynamic duo for a long time together, taking on the world. Maybe they'll share some of their background for us. So we're looking forward to having you. I did say at the beginning, they are okay with having this being recorded, but I know it can be a sensitive issue a little bit. So in this time, so if someone says something and they're like, "Ooh, I don't want that in the public," just tell me. I'll make a note of it and I'll delete it for the YouTubes. Okay, so without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to Reverend Joan Ross.
Thanks, Stephanie. And it's great to be here today. First of all, as the board chair for the AOA, there are several board members on the Zoom today. So give a wave that people can know you're board members of the Association of Affiliates. I know you probably don't know a lot about that organization, but we'll try to catch up at another time to introduce you to the AOA. We've been around since about 2018. And we work hard to align work with the affiliates program, as well as to support the Pacifica National Board. But today we're talking about how to keep a healthy 501(c)(3). And there's a saying that goes around that if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. So John Philo has worked hard over the past years to make sure that community doesn't get on the menu, but gets a seat at the table. He's been a partner of ours for just so many years. We've had battles galore here in Detroit and throughout Michigan that John has helped us to navigate. So today, John, welcome to the Pacifica Roundtable, and thank you so much for agreeing by hook and crook to join us on this table today. First of all, John, can you start out by telling us a little bit about the Maurice and Jane Sugar Loss Center for Social and Economic Justice?
Yes, and thank you all for having me on here. It really is, kind of it's really beautiful to be on this because Pacifica Foundation is such a great institution for the country and always has been. That it's something that I'm aware of, from a distance, and then to actually be invited to speak here to you folks is quite nice, quite honestly, and quite an honor. But I appreciate it very much. As indicated, myself and Reverend Ross go back a long ways. The Maurice and Jane Sugar Law Center is a nonprofit law center here in Detroit. And we're organized around the mission that economic and social rights are human rights and civil rights. But, defining the scope of economic and social rights is really it's a challenging things at times. We do a lot of work related issues, but we do community issues because it's really where it's the touchstone of sort of our practice and what we do. And we really look at it as sort of a by any means necessary and in any way we can help, particularly low-income communities, low-income workers, low-income folks to realize their rights within the context of economic system that's, not fully willing to treat all equally, I guess I'll say. I swear a lot, so when I pause, I'm doing my best not to revert to my natural tendencies.
I feel that.
But that gives you a little bit about us, but we got started with Reverend Ross right around economic development issues, I think was at first. And a lot of it we learn and we do because there just isn't the legal support for community the way there is for a government, the way there is for corporations. And we look at it as our role is to help fill that void as much as we can. We work locally, we project nationally, and we do have a network of folks around the country that we work with and on a wide variety of issues.
Okay. So I guess everybody is looking at what are you seeing in this moment in the political landscape as it relates to social and economic justice work?
Well, it's really challenging, right? At the moment. And it's challenging because we're really getting, the contested structures, right? The institutions we thought existed, really we're learning how fragile they are. I'm worried every day, will Donald Trump actually respect the law? If he's ordered to by the Supreme Court, say, this is a horrible Supreme Court. It's a Supreme Court that's fully, embraced his agenda, but I do think there are limits to some people. And will we force a real crisis where, that we've never seen, where there's going to be some defiance of our basic, even beyond what we've seen. We've seen defiance of our basic principles. I don't mean to suggest we haven't. We certainly have. But it can get worse. And what happens in that context, right? It really is concerning in a lot of ways. The other thing I think we're realizing, we've always heard the expression, right, that you have the rights to the extent you'll resist them being taken away. And that's the only way. And I really am concerned that, we counsel people, do not stop speaking up. Do not, stop talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. Do not stop talking about the rights of transgendered people. Don't. You are, those rights exist to the extent you're willing to exercise it. If you're not, we're even in worse trouble. Now, it might make some of us targets. I know our office is a target quite frequently, particularly from our state government and from others, our local government as well. And I imagine from some in federal government.
Can you give an example, John, of what that looks like, being a target for you guys?
Well, funders, we've been told, in the past that we won't get funded, quite frankly, if we take a certain position. Right now, we're doing a case, and I'm not going to call out some friends, but we're doing a case involving representing protesters at the University of Michigan who are Palestinian. They stood up for Palestinian human rights at that university. They really have been targeted in an extraordinary way, in a way that no other protesters at that university have ever been targeted. The University of Michigan has murals of their protesters on campus, but these students have really been singled out, and it's the content of their speech. Well, our state attorney general has communicated to some of the other nonprofits that if you get involved in this, you're going to be viewed as anti-Semitic, and it's a veiled threat because it's not the viewing that you're, one individual's view of your organization is not what you're wearing. It's that office to be sticking their necks out into something that truly is out of the realm of their practice, the realm of their focus. Why are they doing that? They've been direct representations from funders and, intermediaries with funders that you will not get X, Y, and Z donations or X, Y, and Z support, which for a place like us, I mean, we rely on donors, we rely on grant funding and attorney's fees. Those are the three areas. If any one of them collapses, it's very challenging for us. But we won't make those decisions on that basis. I do know other organizations are making decisions on those bases. And I think you're aware of it too. They're not willingly, they're certainly not.
I've heard it described as like a pause. Some people are putting a pause on things.
Yes, right. I've heard that as well. And I've heard counsel of taking DEI related language off your website or taking it out of your bylaws or anything. I'm not somebody who encourages that. I don't think that's a good idea. I think that really truthfully exposes you. It looks like you thought you were doing something beyond what you should be doing.
You think that makes it easier to like roll over for other things that come down the line?
No question, right?
Yeah.
And we should never apologize for being, opposed to discrimination, to believing in diversity. And we shouldn't, accept attempts to brand that as something other than, truly positive. I'm sorry, I
So,
could ramble for hours.
I appreciate that. I was talking
Stephanie's
with someone
taking my
about that.
question, so I'm gonna
What's
jump
that?
You're taking my question, so I'm going to jump back in.
Okay.
So the Tariff Act of 1894 formally recognizes the concept of tax exempt by specifying that certain organizations could operate without paying taxes. And over time, additional laws have been introduced that regulate what that looks like, leading to the Tax Reform Act of 1969, which establishes the foundation for our current way that we look at nonprofit organizations. Well, since 1969, there's only been 2 tax codes that have been had significant revisions. One in 1986, and certainly the one we're all most familiar with happened in 2017, which really impacted how people give, because it allowed more for the standard exemption versus itemized deductions where people actually gave. So, John, this year, the 2017 code sunsets. So that puts nonprofits at a really precarious position now, because there's this attack that comes against for-profit and nonprofit. The for-profit people say, how can we sell the product when you're giving it away or you're working to make it free? So if we look in recent years at the increasing debate around this taxation of nonprofits, what are the processes or procedures that you think we should, as nonprofits, make sure that are in place that could help us against that attack, or that could impact the quality of the debate against that? Is that too complicated?
No, I mean, just in terms of procedures, I'm not too sure what to say there. I will say this, when I saw that, I really looked at it to look at, like take a look at Project 2025. Where do these folks come out on, nonprofits and on, in what is this next round of taxation reform likely to look at like, right? If you look at that Project 25, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with, right? There's clearly a delineation in the minds of these folks that there's good nonprofits and bad nonprofits, right? In their minds, religious nonprofits are good, charitable nonprofits that support privatization of education or privatization of other governmental services is sometimes okay. It is not okay when when they use the terms pejoratively, like woke agenda, or to, enforce Marxist ideas, or to, do many of the things that traditional nonprofits do, promote civil liberties, reproductive rights, all those. So they go after it. So I do think we can expect some going after what we consider to be traditional nonprofits who speak truth to power, basically, is about as simple as you can say it. And how are they going to do that, right? Because the previous round of taxation reform, that last round that you'd mentioned, that got a way of, or the primary way it impacted nonprofits was to raise the deduction so that when somebody wrote a check to a nonprofit, it wasn't as significant to them in terms of reducing their taxes. So it reduced some donation in some effects. But they weren't really directing themselves at nonprofits in those activities. I think what we can see more of is around the idea of what's a charitable purpose. What constitutes lobbying? What constitutes political activity that can subject you to losing that nonprofit status, particularly for us, and in relation to immigrant rights, which at least in our opposition translates into terrorists or something equating equally bad. That's where I see it. Now, how do we stop that, or how do we at least fight back to that? To me, in some ways, is to make it, I do think everyone who is engaged in nonprofit activity, who's, sort of on our side or doing our work, is genuinely doing community work, is genuinely doing services that are meaningful to people. That if taken away, there's going to be direct consequences to that in certain ways, from putting more onus on government to, leaving folks without recourse in certain ways. And I think we need to make that case publicly and stronger, right? I'll take our organization. We're terrible at outreach. That's just honest. We are obsessive about our work. And we're very obsessive about that, about, doing as many right cases as we can, trying to help people get their wages who didn't get them, trying to inform people about their rights to not have their utilities shut off. And that leaves us often, not making the public case of why there's a need for us to exist. And I think our supporters and I think our clients they're just a natural constituency that exists that we don't marshal for those purposes. But that's one way to do it. The other things is to, we do have to we live in this society. We don't live in the society that we want to live in, right? We're not in the just society. We live in this society that's capitalist, that's, it is what it is. And that means we do have to play by some of those rules if we want to continue to exist and do work in that society. And for us, that's crossing our T's and dotting our I's on our registrations, right? There's a half dozen registrations you have to do every year. I'm pretty sure if I got 20 nonprofits together, 13 of them wouldn't have filed their annual reports yet. Those are just all those sort of things you got to do. And I think you really do have to be cognizant of it in this environment that just gives openings. The other things is lobbying, right? We need to document it that we're not, we're not an arm of any political party. We are not, doing inappropriate lobbying. We have every right to inform the public and to educate them on issues. And we're not going to apologize for that. We're going to do it. But we also document ourselves so that we're not open to those attacks, that we are just an extension of, a political party or doing things that are, fuzzy. The other thing is being smart, right? I do a lot of work against corporations, right? And I ask for the board minutes. You know what I get in board minutes? I get discussed workforce. Anything more than that, we've got to operate on that level, right? Is be smart. We do our minutes, but our minutes don't, they're not inappropriate, and they're not things that we, that are used against us just because we were too lazy to do it the way every other corporation does it. I don't know. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess it leads to the point that we have here in Detroit, we have a Transforming Power Fund, which is a participatory grant fund that we've established maybe 10 years ago, that we are able to get funds and then redistribute those funds into community. And so we get a lot of grassroots organizations. And to John's point, I can't tell you the number of groups that haven't filed a 990, that haven't done simply an annual report every year for $20, that hasn't had the funds they think to do an audit, and that certainly don't have good record retention policies or some of the other things that maybe you all have in place. But often in radio, it seems that we're also focused on the FCC and the rules and regulations that they have issued that govern us, that we forget there's also a 501c3, that we need to make sure we do all of those things. So we've provided you with a list of some essentials that you have to do. And simply the fact of doing an annual budget or knowing the difference between your operating expense and your annual budget. So while we just hurry to do radio often, we miss some of this 501c3 stuff. And that's what we're talking about, trying to make sure that that organization is healthy on both sides of the table, on the radio side, as well as what's expected of a 501c3. And granted, sometimes there isn't a lot of money to pay $8,000 or $10,000 for an audit. But when it comes down to this evaluation, what you have in place and how you've built that organization is going to speak a lot to people about this difference between for-profit and not-for-profit, and whether you're really operating as a nonprofit organization. So if you read through those things, and if you have questions, certainly John, or maybe I can help you with some of that, even if it's to the point of just sitting down and chatting about how do you get those things done on a limited kinds of budget. So
Certainly.
go ahead, John.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that, sometimes, right, all that stuff seems rather daunting. But the truth is, it's a checklist, and most of the things are, pretty easily doable online for modest amounts. The audit type of thing, that's, there's the thing that costs. But there are options, and there are options in terms of, one thing we have around here is an accounting aid society that does do pro bono work for low-income folks and even low-income organizations, I believe, at times. So there is the possibility of some of those things, but most is just follow that checklist every year.
Did everyone get a copy of the handouts that Reverend Jones sent out? That is here today?
I hope you did, because we put a lot into making sure we put a lot of resources together for you. Because often as a nonprofit, you say, well, I don't have the money. But to John's point, we're going to talk a little bit later about cooperation, collaboration, and allies. Sometimes you need to really dig and find out who your allies are, who's there, that maybe you'd never, maybe because they're operating on the social justice side, or they're doing this community equity development, that you don't see them because you're radio people, and you don't see them as doing the same kind of work, but they are there, and you have to develop the allies. So I sent out a lot of things. John referenced knowing the difference between advocacy and lobbying. I sent you the Ford Foundation policy that outlines very detailed what's advocacy and what is lobbying, and when do you cross the line. We've had meetings that I've had to bring an attorney with me to make sure I stayed on the right line of advocacy and lobbying, because I didn't want to cross over into lobbying. I wanted to stay as an advocate. And if you don't feel that you can define that difference, then maybe you ought to read the material, or, contact a John Philo and say, hey, I'm doing this. Is it advocacy or is it lobbying? Because lobbying could get you into trouble with grant dollars. So
And if you haven't seen it yet, they are on the invite for the roundtable.
Right. I tried to combine them. You can go through them. But I want to skip, John, to a little bit of talking about boards. And I define this as a bold board. In your opinion, what is a bold board? And what is the two or the concepts most important when we consider what kind of board we have and how we move forward with that board?
Geez, I'm going to be interested to hear your comments on that, Reverend. I will say with me, a bold board is one who is a board that's committed to the mission, right, first and foremost, and not in a surface way, but in a way that comes almost from the heart, in that when you come with that perspective, we're, at least with us, we're trying to do things that, disturb the status quo, right? So for us, we need people who are unafraid in those areas, who are thoughtful, who are smart, who are realistic, grounded in reality, but who at the end of the day have the courage to be bold in difficult times, and we're going to need it. This is, I always, and it's a fine line too, right? Because I don't mind someone telling me, John, I don't have any problem with what you're trying to do, but it's unrealistic. It's not going to happen, and you're tilting at windmills right now. That's good advice. That's helpful. That's having the courage to tell us when we're wrong is an important aspect as well. But also not to be afraid of our missions, not to be afraid of, of opposition, of institutional opposition, because that does exist, and it takes a lot of different forms, when we do that. But I think I missed the second part of your question there, Reverend Ross.
So, yeah, it was in considering the concept important to consider what we've discussed earlier, to reflect on those boards in terms of where we are right this minute in the landscape.
Yeah, and I don't think we need cowboys, right? We need courage, not just, I like the idea of, the riding the range and taking on bad people for our office. And that's fine, but not in terms of, our work's serious work, and it matters to our communities. And we can't be casual, and we can't be, it takes courage, and at the same time, we can't be casual about this. We've got a duty to preserve ourselves. We've got a duty to preserve our offices, got a duty to continue the work that everybody on this call does.
You say like showing courage, like keeping the DEI practices on your website.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And not being afraid of when somebody asks you why you do that. To be able to be willing and able to talk about it and defend it, and not, you got nothing to apologize for. And I don't understand the mentality of some of the.
So, John, I think a lot of us started our organizations and maybe our stations with a family and friends board. It was who could I tap to serve on this board because I need this number of people, and especially for the FCC application process. But when we speak about a bold board, it's a board that has gone through that basic family and friends elimination. Now we're down to the people who have some skills and some expertise to bring to the board, as well as this courage that we're talking about, as well as really understanding the mission, not just attending a meeting once a month because you have a regular board meeting and it's on Zoom and it's easy, but who has really invested in developing where this mission is, and who's willing to sit with you and draw the line in the sand and say, okay, here's the ride or die place. We ain't going past this place, and we understand now, but what do they do to help move that? And not just say, I'm with you, I'm behind you, I got the arrows in case you run out. I need them shooting and not sitting in the background. So when we talk about, you got to get your boards, and you have to analyze that. Where's your board? How long has it been? And what have you invested in training them and in doing that development to get them beyond family and friends, but into an actual boldness that they can operate for you at this time? And then they have to look at the time. They have to realize the moment too, not just from a personal perspective of what they're protecting of their own, but what are we doing as for community? What's community involvement and stake in this point? And look at the situation and the mission in terms of that situation, not their personal situation. I don't know if you have questions or you want to comment further about boldness in the boards?
I want to add one thing to that, because I think you made some really good points. And that's something that we've been adding. We just added several board members. And a challenge for us internally as an organization that is, I've come to this awareness over, I don't know, recent years, is we also have to protect our board, and we have to give them opportunities to step up, to be more invested in the organization and to contribute. And, sometimes because I realize, like for us at least, we have a great board and great people. But we need to give them avenues to express that within our organization. And at times, you can just get caught up in the work and you lose sight of some of that. And that's to real be a participatory, a participatory board that's part of the organization, not just a entity off to the right or on the side or above, that is there. And that can be challenging, but that really needs to be done.
Right. So every year we invest money in making sure that our board is developed, whether that means sending them to a conference or getting them to participate in some phase of the work. For us, we do a lot with Community Land Trust. We have the first Community Land Trust in Detroit. So we make sure that if there's a conference, they're there. And if possible, they're presenting. So they're carrying the message of the organization into other places. They grow better that way. And then they learn more about what it is, and they stand up for it better than just being the board that meets once a month for an hour and everybody's happy and we go back home and they wait for the ED to update them again. If you can't even get your board to open your newsletter, then you got a problem with them standing behind you when time comes to fight. So I want to move and talk about funders. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. This is a small group. We certainly can take those questions.
Does anyone have any questions so far?
Okay. Well, either we're doing a great job or they went to sleep at the switch, John, one way or the other. So let's talk about funders. How do you determine, or what have you heard, anything from philanthropy to indicate how they're thinking in this moment and what's their direction?
It's interesting, right? Because some organizations in this environment get flooded with individual donations. We've never been one of those organizations, but for us, we are considering how to do better in those areas. Because I will say I've had some very interesting out of the blue phone calls from from some folks who really are looking to support bold work. And that's unusual for us. So we need to find a way to tap into that, but also communicate our work out larger to that. With respect to the foundations, it's been a mixed bag. I have received some assurances from some of our foundation funders. Others I'm very concerned about and trying to make, take meetings and trying to identify potential, at least issue points for them. For for us, it does not change the work, but it changes the way we go about trying to get the to reach the funders who at least will continue to support or who are willing to be bold and willing to share our vision at this point. But it's an uncertain landscape. The one thing we have a tremendous, or at least we're a benefit from, we generally do not have government grants. We have a few times, but it's very unusual for us. So we're insulated from that a little bit. But we do know, some of our grants are directly related to, equitable development, equitable implementation of law and their enforcement, and some of those are new grants. So we're watching to see what's going to happen there, because we have heard that that's a priority of at least of the you don't know what you're hearing, if what you're hearing is accurate, but we've heard it, through the tea leaves that that's maybe a subject of investigation from the federal government towards those foundations who are funding those types of programs.
Yeah, we've heard that. So we call this section funders are funny. And they are. I mean, as John said, there's this quiet moment right now when we're not hearing a lot from the funders that are heavily invested in justice work. They're quiet, but we also are hearing that they may, because of this tax tariff thing that sunsets in 2025, they may be called for investigation and testimony before Congress. But it's always worrisome when you've got funders who are doing your capacity building work and you're not hearing where they're standing. Foundations are givers. That's what they're known for, giving. I sent you all the trends of the 11 trends that are happening in 2025 of foundations. I think that's a valuable read. A lot of the smaller foundations are sunsetting themselves. They're saying, hey, we're going to do 10 years. We're in a spin down because they want to get out of this whole fight. They don't want to stay it any longer. And some of them have been doing it for a long, long time. So there is a funding matrix that we've created that I couldn't send you. I don't know why it wouldn't attach to the document, but if you're interested, I think you all ought to build a funding matrix which lists the foundations that fund, what their values are, how those values align with you, who the contacts are, what their grant cycles are, as you begin to look at where are the other sources. Now, we don't have a federal grant. We do have an EPA grant that went on into review and I guess is going to die, but okay, it dies. So, but in the meantime, we always have to be on the lookout as grants are finished and completed. How do we move to the next grant and keep the vision and the mission? So if you don't have something like a matrix that you're working on all the time, someone's always adding who a new contact is, what a new vision is, when a foundation changes its values or changes its strategic plan, then you should start to look at that. And because you see, first of all, we were a social justice group before we were a radio station. So we don't get our funds through underwriting. We don't do any underwriting on our station. We get all our funds through our social justice work. And we are able to fund radio through that program. So I encourage you, if you don't have a matrix, you can start one. You don't have to join Grant Station or some of those systems that you pay for. You can begin to build what is a matrix for you. And you can include a corporate tab. So there are some corporations in your area who share your values or businesses that you could tap into and not just always say, well, I don't have, or we're going to do another drive, or we didn't get but, $2,000 from the drive and we need $90,000. So I encourage you to create a matrix. And if you want, I'll try to send our example. And also on there, we have red organizations that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole if they were giving a whole bunch of money away. And they probably wouldn't touch me, believe it. As John mentioned earlier, I've had funders that have blackballed me because of our stand, because of the work that John helped us do with community benefits, and that was totally against their agendas at the time. They blackballed me. So I put them on there and they're red. I don't care how much money they're offering. We ain't wasting time with that. So you need to have the good guys and the bad guys on your funder matrix and begin to develop a real fund strategy. So two more areas, John, we need to get your advice on. First of all, you mentioned about rethinking your story. Is this a moment, and I think you've answered this question, is this a moment that we need to rethink our story, to scrub those websites and clean up our act and try to change the vision so that we align with somebody else's plan?
Yeah, I think I've been clear on, at least in my mind on that. I don't think we need that. Now, do we need to be smart and just make sure that take a look at our things and make sure we didn't just have a oops moment of phrasing something poorly or something like that? Sure, we should do that. We should always do that. But, and now is the time gives us an impetus to, but we shouldn't retreat from our values and what we've expressed in substantively in any sense. And in telling the story, I do think for us as an organization, it's time to really connect it to the community and that we live in and that we work in making a difference in people's lives. Because we do, all these organizations do. God knows Pacific Radio has, and we don't often express that, and I think we need to. But no, we're not, don't change the substance of our story. The substance matters and it's important. And we didn't come about this casually. It was earned.
Yeah. So there's another presentation, I think I sent it to Stephanie, on triaging your work. And we've developed that in 2020 during COVID. There are moments that you have to evaluate all of your work and say, what do I need to pause? It's not that you scrubbed it or changed your mission or, realigned your values. For instance, we're doing a green space here in Detroit. We've been working for, this is our third year of building an intentional green space, which will become an outdoor science center. So that work, building a green space, it's already seeded, it's been growing for 2 years, we've got the fencing and the border in. Do we need to pause that and take the money that we have for that and move it into other pieces of social justice work at this time? For instance, we were going to put in a pathway for $25,000. Well, do I need to move forward with the pathway? Or people can still walk in it. I mean, it's not like, but the pathway is cool, right? It's beautiful and it's neat. But do I need to pause that and put $25,000 in making sure that our food pantry is going to be adequately stocked? Or do I need to move that $25,000 into our internet service to make sure we can expand our internet service to cover more neighborhoods? So when we say triage your work, we don't mean scrub it and make it sterile and get rid of all the things somebody's going to get mad about. Truly, I'm one of those people that folks get mad at all the time because, Reverend Ross really don't care. They don't have a heaven or a hell to put me in. So we move forward with what we believe we're supposed to do. But there are times when we sit and with the board's help, say, okay, let's pause that work for 6 months, 8 months, a year, and let's move this direction now, or let's strengthen up this particular area. And I think in the moment we're in, we may have to triage some work and say, this needs to pause for a minute. So
Yeah.
one last area I want to talk about, it's always fun for me to talk about cooperation, collaboration, and allies. So let's jump into that, John.
Some of what you got there explains some of this, right? We're looking to build allies, right? We will take cooperation and collaboration. For us, it's always been a philosophy that, look, if you're on our side, we can work with you, right? We'll find a way. And we work with labor. We have very traditional labor and we have radical labor. And those two won't talk to each other. We will work with each if it means getting decent treatment for immigrant workers in the workplace. So we will find a way to do that. But ultimately for us, we're looking to, I'd almost look at it as a stepping stone, that we're, using opportunities to cooperate, to build collaborations, to end up to be allies. Now, I understand there's different philosophies on some of this, but for us, that's really, it is that sort of stepping stone, because I think, I know it's corny, but I do think there's more that bind us than that separate us. And we fixate on the things that we are differences. And particularly on the left, right? I mean, and we need, this is not the time for that. This is the time for, you know, for getting a united front and agreeing and use those opportunities, build the cooperate or start with cooperation and end up with allies.
Right. So, I suppose I'm one of the big people that fight this. I cooperate with those people whose values line up with mine. There are a lot of folks whose values don't line up with mine, and I don't waste a lot of time with that. I collaborate with the folks who are really moving in the direction I'm moving in and who might need an encouraging word or a moment of collaboration with me. But I strive to build allies, those people that I know across the histories of time, they're going to stay with me, they're going to stand with me, and they have this boldness that we're looking for in the moment. So I encourage you to look in your areas. Maybe you've never talked to the nonprofits who do social justice work because you all about radio, and that's cool. But maybe it's time that you found some allies, whether it's your nonprofit association in your state, or if it's a law firm like Sugar Law Center, or if it's the Lawyers Guild or the ACLU, or find the allies, because in the moment of the storm, you ain't got time to look through the yellow pages and find out who your allies are. You need to know who your allies are before you lace up and jump on the horse, okay? So that's what we have to present today. If you don't have some of these contacts, maybe we can help you. We do work with some national organizations, and John has great affiliations across the country. Maybe it's time to build that bank of allies. And I think you can use the AOA. We've got a very good board. They're very knowledgeable. They've been around a long time. Perhaps they could help you build those allies as well. But that's what we wanted to talk about today. I hope you enjoy the handouts, and we'll open it up to Stephanie.
Thank you, Reverend Joan. This was wonderfully informative, and amidst the chaos, it's been a very orienting touchstone to be a part of. I really appreciate you both sharing with us today. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you for.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Or are you processing?
Well, I have a question for Reverend Joan and for John. Let's say for your nonprofit, you're feeling overwhelmed with all of the different options that are out there that you need to address and to, quote unquote, triage. If you needed a starting point, where would that be for the biggest impact, one? And then the second thing is you're talking about also finding allies. How would you kind of address that in a way where you could find allies that would help, but not get to a point where all of a sudden you're feeling you're stretched thin, or that you're feeling in a way that's very sustainable for you to start off? I guess those are my two questions.
So I'll start first and then turn it over to John. So I think in the moment, all of us are tending to feel overwhelmed. And I think this is where your board can come in and help you with some of this. Because first of all, you're not doing this by yourself. You're doing this with the agency of the board to support you. So I would talk over with my board, where are the points that I'm feeling overwhelmed? And where can they step in? Of course, you may have some key staff that can do some of that as well. You also have the Association of Affiliates there, and you have the affiliates program. So as far as that part of your life, radio, that's a good place to start. To the second part of where would you start? I would start by, first of all, evaluating what is it that I'm doing. Is it social justice work? Is it primarily radio? What is it? And then when you have an ally, it doesn't mean you have to get spread thin. It just means I know that John Philo and the Sugar Law Center is there. So if I'm starting to do this kind of work and I'm feeling the pressure, I can just touch my ally and say, hey, do you think this is pressure? Should I back off of it? Or are you seeing this landscape differently than I'm seeing it? Not that I need to meet with John every day and, hang out with Liz and all the team there, or go to 6 more meetings, because God knows I can't take any more meetings on my book. It's just Zoom overload. But I know my ally is there. We're doing a community solar trust right now. So we're meeting with Sugar Loss Center to help us develop that. What does that trust look like? But that doesn't mean 10 more meetings. That means, okay, here's their direction. They're going to be moving this piece of it. I'm going to be moving this other piece of it. And occasionally we have to touch points to make sure we're heading in the right direction with it. But I don't think overwhelmed is one of those harmful emotions that'll really cause you health problems. So you have to disperse overwhelm right away and say, okay, there's only so many peas I'm going to put on my plate because I really don't like peas. And any more peas than that, I'm going to scrape them into the trash and deal with them at another point in time.
I would agree with, just about all of that. And that, for us, I was thinking when you were talking about triaging, how we've gone through in rapid succession, like 3 of major things. The first Trump administration really caused us to triage and look at, to shift resources away from certain things that we were doing, which were good things, but the circumstances required it, particularly at that time towards immigration rights and some of the attacks on Islamic folks. And then the COVID pandemic caused the exact same thing with us. We really had to shift where, and focus and develop some new skills that we did. And then again, now we're back because, although we've seen them once, it is quite different what's going on. And the hard thing for us, we do an internal examination of that among all the staff and among the board, and it's purposeful, but the part of it is what we can do, not what we want to do. Because really looking at it, and for us, the immediate focuses have been around federal workers' rights and around immigrant attacks and ICE raids, and around the attack on transgendered folks. And thinking where we can have the impact, because we don't have limitless resources, and we don't have, the Zoom meetings are through the roof on all these issues, and that's can really make you feel overwhelmed and make you feel like you're doing nothing but attending Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
So it really is a matter of internal prioritization and doing what you can, not what you want, and recognizing those 2 things aren't different. And sort of at that, in terms of building the allies, I am a firm believer in just blindly calling people who I think are doing work that relates to what I'm doing and that is decent work, and saying, hey, we're getting together a meeting just to talk. There's no obligations. You're not getting another thing. But let's make a connection, because this is coming and I think you may be interested in too. And, I can handle people who are like, hey, we're not going in that direction or whatever. But, I will always pick up the phone for another organization who, is, going through what we're going through and trying to figure ways to, even if it's just to keep informed of what we're doing. Like, that's probably the best Zoom meeting that I regularly have right now in response to Trump, is a bunch of organizations that are just getting together to keep each other informed of what we're doing. Nobody's getting tasks, but we know, so we're not duplicating efforts, and we're aware of opportunities to work together on certain things.
All right. And
I hope that was helpful. I don't know.
another ally is whether you should have at least some of your Congress people and your state legislation as at least a touchable person, that you can at least call their staff or call them directly and know that you have that kind of connection. You just sitting out here. I remember John and all of us were on a call one day, and it was the day that I guess about 72 executive orders hit the street, and it was almost moment by moment, things were changing, and we were on with a congressional ally at that point, and they were telling us what they were hearing from Congress, right, being on the floor, and we were hearing these other things through the email, through the news outlets. So it's good to have even them, and I know you may be in some states that you think that's impossible, but you're still a voter, okay? And you still have the right to call on those people and say, you need to talk to me today. So again, that's that boldness that has to come in. One of the things we learned this morning in a session was that we should be assessing the impact of this stuff on our organizations, whether it's the funding freezes or whether it's the impact on others that is really impacting our organization. For us, it's food. I mean, in February, we were hearing that USDA was cut, so we weren't going to get that as a food source. So we started making arrangements. Okay, if I don't have USDA, where's the food going to come from? Who's got the money? How do I get that money into us? But we need to begin to document and assess where's the impact on our organizations. So when you talk to these people, when you talk to your congressman or your state legislation, then you can say, here's the facts, buddy. This is impacting us, and here's what's happening. Now, I'm on the ground and you're not. What are you going to do about it? So you got to find ways to know what's happening in your pipeline. How's it affecting and assessing the impact to your pipeline, as well as how's it affecting and impacting your distribution and delivery to your folks, to your community.
Fantastic.
Okay,
Any
so
final thoughts?
Stay
well, either
strong.
we bored you to death or we did a good job, John. Drinks are on me either
I
way.
think you did a great job. I
Yeah.
wanna do my part and not overextend the Zoom meeting.
Okay. All righty.
But I want to say, yeah, I mean, again, just thank you for the wonderful practical and emotional support. Yeah, you guys have a great outlook for taking on this challenge, and I hope it ripples out to everyone. John C. Philo of the Sugar Law Center and Reverend Joan Ross of WNC in Detroit. Thank you so much for your time. Really
Okay.
appreciate it.
So remember, if you're not
Thanks,
at the table, you're on the menu. Have a good day. See you
You
soon.
bet.
Thanks all.
Same to you.
Bye-bye.